the cold steel of a .45 caliber pistol pressed against the back of her skull, the metallic click echoing in the damp, abandoned warehouse. Most women would have wept. Most would have begged for their lives, offering anything to the imposing, blood-spattered Mafia boss standing before them. But Harper Hayes didn't cry. She didn't beg. Instead, she let out a long, exhausted sigh, glared at the ruthless head of the Costa Syndicate, and said, "If you're going to shoot me, do it quickly. I've just worked a 16-hour shift at St. Jude's ER. My feet are killing me. And frankly, death sounds like a solid nap." Vincenzo Costa froze. In all his years of organized crime, no one had ever looked at him with sheer, unadulterated annoyance. He had kidnapped the wrong girl, and that single, irritated sigh was about to change the entire underworld. The rain in Chicago that Tuesday night wasn't just wet, it was spiteful. It drove down in icy, diagonal sheets, biting through the thin fabric of Harper Hayes' trench coat as she trudged away from St. Jude's Medical Center. Harper was 27, chronically sleep-deprived, and fueled almost entirely by black coffee and sheer spite. As a senior trauma nurse in one of the city's most chaotic emergency rooms, she had spent the last 16 hours dealing with a multi-car pileup on the I-90, a ruptured appendix, and a very combative drunk who had tried to bite her arm. Her life was a relentless cycle of blood, alarms, and fluorescent lighting. She didn't have time for a social life, let alone drama. All she wanted was to reach her cramped, overpriced apartment on West Elm Street, feed her indifferent tabby cat, Barnaby, and sleep for a century. To save time, Harper took the shortcut down an alleyway, cutting behind a row of closed dive bars and auto repair shops. It was a route her mother had explicitly warned her about, but tonight the cold had seeped into her bones, and the promise of a warm radiator was worth the risk. The alley smelled of wet asphalt, overflowing dumpsters, and stale beer. She was 3 blocks away from her apartment when she heard the unmistakable purr of a heavy engine idling. A sleek, black Cadillac Escalade, its windows tinted so dark they looked like polished obsidian, crawled alongside her. Harper didn't stop. In her experience, ignoring the weirdos of the night was the best survival tactic. She tightened her grip on her umbrella, her sensible nursing clogs splashing through a deep puddle. Then, the Escalade's doors flew open. Before Harper could scream, a thick, calloused hand clamped over her mouth, tasting faintly of leather and expensive cologne. A strong arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her entirely off the ground. Her umbrella clattered to the wet pavement. She kicked wildly, her clogs connecting with a solid shin, eliciting a muffled curse from her attacker. "Get her in! Move! Move! Move!" A rough voice barked over the sound of the pouring rain. A heavy, suffocating canvas bag was yanked down over her head, plunging her into absolute darkness. She was shoved unceremoniously into the back of the SUV. The door slammed shut, sealing her in a climate-controlled environment that smelled of rich leather and impending doom. The vehicle accelerated violently, throwing Harper against the side door. Panic, the primal, animalistic kind, surged in her chest for exactly 10 seconds. She fought against the zip ties that a pair of unseen hands were rapidly securing around her wrists. "Keep still, Miss Kensington," a deep, raspy voice warned from the seat next to her. "Or we'll have to use the sedatives. The boss wants you awake, but we can make exceptions. Miss Kensington." The panic abruptly receded, replaced by a profound, towering wave of exhaustion and irritation. They thought she was someone else. Of course they did. It wasn't enough that her landlord had raised the rent, or that Dr. Aris had yelled at her over a missing chart. Now, she was being kidnapped in a case of mistaken identity. "I am not Miss Kensington," Harper said, her voice muffled by the canvas bag. She coughed, the dusty fabric tickling her throat. "My name is Harper Hayes. I'm a nurse. You have the wrong person, and I really need to go to sleep." A cruel chuckle echoed from the front seat. "Yeah, nice try, sweetheart. You think wearing scrubs under that coat makes you invisible? We know exactly who you are, Harlow. You shouldn't have stolen from the Costa family." Harper slumped against the seat, her zip-tied hands resting in her lap. Harlow Kensington. She recognized the name. Harlow was the impossibly glamorous, incredibly reckless heiress who lived in the penthouse of Harper's building. Just that morning, Harper had accidentally grabbed Harlow's dry-cleaned trench coat from the lobby concierge in her sleep-deprived haze, a coat she was currently wearing. She was being kidnapped over a coat mix-up. Instead of crying, Harper rested her head against the cool glass of the window beneath the hood. The seats in the Escalade were actually incredibly plush, providing excellent lumbar support. The steady hum of the engine was almost rhythmic. If she ignored the fact that she was bound and being transported to an unknown location by armed thugs, it was the most comfortable she had been all day. "Are we going to be driving for a while?" Harper asked, her voice flat. "Shut up," the man next to her growled. "I'm just asking," Harper replied, closing her eyes inside the bag, "because if it's going to be more than 20 minutes, I'm taking a nap." Silence descended on the back of the SUV. The thugs exchanged bewildered looks in the darkness. Victims usually cried. They begged. They hyperventilated. They didn't schedule naps. True to her word, within 5 minutes, the exhausting events of the day claimed her. Harper Hayes, currently bound and kidnapped by the most dangerous crime syndicate in Chicago, fell into a deep, snoring sleep. "Wake up." A sharp kick to the side of her chair jarred Harper out of her dream. She gasped, her neck stiff, her wrists throbbing where the plastic zip ties bit into her skin. The canvas bag was violently yanked off her head. The sudden influx of harsh industrial lighting made her squint. As her vision cleared, she took stock of her surroundings. She was sitting on a metal folding chair in the center of a massive, cavernous warehouse. The air was thick with the scent of motor oil, damp concrete, and the metallic tang of blood. Crates of God knows what were stacked to the high ceiling. Standing in front of her were 3 men. 2 were the gorillas from the SUV, hulking masses of muscle in cheap suits. But it was the man in the center who commanded the room. Vincenzo Costa. Even a chronically overworked nurse who rarely watched the news knew the face of the devil. He was devastatingly handsome in a sharp, predatory way. High cheekbones, a strong jaw peppered with dark stubble, and eyes the color of shattered ice. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Harper's yearly salary, though he had discarded the jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faded ink. He was holding a manila folder, looking at her with a mixture of cold calculation and mild confusion. "Harlow Kensington," Vincenzo said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. It wasn't a question. Harper blinked the sleep from her eyes. She looked at Vincenzo, then at the 2 thugs, and finally down at the expensive designer trench coat she was wearing over her faded, blue cartoon print hospital scrubs. "I told your gorillas in the car," Harper said, her voice raspy. She cleared her throat. "I'm not Harlow Kensington. I'm Harper Hayes. Harlow lives in my building. We have the same dry cleaner. I took the wrong coat this morning. If you look in the left pocket, there's a half-eaten granola bar and a badge for St. Jude's Medical Center." Vincenzo narrowed his eyes. He gestured to one of the thugs, a man with a broken nose named Dominic. Dominic stepped forward, roughly patting Harper down and plunging his hand into the coat pocket. He pulled out a crushed oat bar and a plastic hospital ID badge. He held the badge up, squinting at the photo. "Boss," Dominic muttered, his voice thick. "The picture. It's her. Harper Hayes, registered nurse." Vincenzo's icy gaze snapped back to Harper. The realization hit him, but he masked it flawlessly. The Costa family did not make mistakes. Showing weakness in front of his men was out of the question. "A clever disguise," Vincenzo lied smoothly, tossing the manila folder onto a nearby crate. "You think a fake badge and some scrubs will save you, Harlow? You diverted $4 million from our accounts to Thomas Gallagher's syndicate. I want the routing numbers. Now." Harper let out that long, exasperated sigh. It was the sigh of a woman who had dealt with anti-vaxxers, belligerent drunks, and arrogant surgeons all day. "Okay, listen to me very carefully, Mr. Costa," Harper said, leaning forward as much as the zip ties would allow. Her tone was sharp, authoritative, adopting the exact voice she used to command the trauma bay. "I don't care about your $4 million. I don't know who Thomas Gallagher is. I am 27 years old. I make $65,000 a year, and I currently have $12 in my checking account. My cat is waiting for his dinner. Untie me, take me home, and I will pretend this absolutely ridiculous display of incompetence never happened." Vincenzo stared at her. The silence in the warehouse was deafening. Dominic and the other thug, Paulie, shifted uncomfortably, waiting for their boss to execute the woman who had just insulted him to his face. Before Vincenzo could respond, a sudden, wet cough echoed from the shadows in the corner of the room. Harper's head snapped toward the sound. Her trained eyes adjusted to the gloom, spotting a man slumped against a stack of wooden pallets. He was young, maybe early 20s, clutching his side. Dark blood pooled rapidly on the concrete beneath him, black in the dim light. "Nicky took a hit during the pickup, boss," Paulie said, following her gaze. "Gallagher's men clipped him in the alley before we grabbed the girl. He's bleeding out." "Did you call the cleaner?" Vincenzo asked, his tone shifting from interrogator to commander. "Yeah, Doc Rossi is on his way, but he's coming from the south side. Gonna be at least 40 minutes in this rain." Harper watched the young man. Nicky. His breathing was shallow, rapid. His skin, even from this distance, looked ashen and diaphoretic. He coughed again, a weak, frothy sound. "He doesn't have 40 minutes, Harper said sharply. Vincenzo looked back at her, annoyed. "Keep your mouth shut." "He's in hypovolemic shock," Harper continued, her voice rising, completely ignoring the mob boss's command. "Look at the puddle, you idiots! He's severed an artery, likely the descending branch. If you don't apply proper pressure and pack that wound right now, his heart will stop in less than 10 minutes. Vincenzo hesitated. He looked at Nicky, whose eyes were rolling back into his head, then at the captive woman who was currently giving him medical advice. "Untie me," Harper ordered, her eyes blazing with sudden intensity. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by the adrenaline of the ER. "If you want him to live, cut these damn zip ties." Vincenzo stepped into her personal space. He loomed over her, his cologne, cedar and bergamot, mixing with the smell of danger. "If you try anything, I will put a bullet in your kneecap. If I try anything, my hands will be covered in your friend's blood," Harper snapped back, not breaking eye contact. "Cut the ties." With a flick of his wrist, Vincenzo produced a sleek, silver switchblade. He stepped behind her, the cold metal brushing her wrists before the plastic ties snapped open. Harper didn't rub her wrists or hesitate. She sprang from the chair, shedding the expensive trench coat, and sprinted to the corner of the warehouse. She dropped to her knees beside the bleeding man, her scrubs instantly soaking up the blood on the floor. "Hey, Nicky, stay with me," Harper said, her voice suddenly gentle, calm. She tore his bloody shirt open, exposing the gunshot wound just above his hip. It was a messy exit wound, pulsing with dark red blood. "Paulie, bring me a first aid kit. Don't tell me you don't have one. And I need clean towels, alcohol, and your belt." The thugs looked at Vincenzo for permission. Vincenzo, utterly captivated by the sudden transformation of the woman before him, gave a curt nod. For the next 8 minutes, Harper Hayes commanded the Chicago Mafia. She barked orders at hardened killers, making Dominic hold pressure while she improvised a tourniquet with Paulie's leather belt. She lacked hemostatic gauze, so she aggressively packed the wound with standard sterile dressing, her hands moving with practiced, ruthless efficiency. She ignored the blood coating her forearms, her focus entirely on Nicky's fading pulse. "Hold this," she commanded Vincenzo, grabbing his hand and pressing it hard against the packed wound. "Do not let up the pressure, or he bleeds out." Vincenzo knelt beside her, his large hand covering hers, pressing down on his dying man. He watched her profile, the stray lock of brown hair stuck to her sweaty forehead, the fierce, unyielding determination in her dark eyes. She wasn't terrified of him. She wasn't intimidated by the blood or the guns. She was completely in her element. "Pulse is stabilizing," Harper breathed, sitting back slightly, wiping her forehead with the back of her bloody wrist. "He needs a blood transfusion and a surgeon to repair the artery immediately. But he won't die on this floor." She looked up, meeting Vincenzo's ice-blue eyes. They were inches apart, kneeling in a pool of blood. "You're actually a nurse," Vincenzo said quietly, the realization finally settling in. "I told you," Harper sighed, the adrenaline beginning to crash, the exhaustion creeping back in. "I'm Harper Hayes, and you kidnapped the wrong girl." The heavy metal doors of the warehouse groaned open precisely 38 minutes later. A short, balding man carrying a black leather medical bag rushed in, flanked by 2 more of Costa's men. Dr. Rossi, the underground physician, took one look at Nicky, the expertly packed wound, and the makeshift tourniquet, and let out a low whistle. "Who did this?" Rossi asked, quickly hooking Nicky up to a bag of O-negative blood he had brought with him. "They saved his life. Another 5 minutes and he would have been a ghost." Vincenzo stood up slowly, wiping Nicky's blood from his hands with a rag. He looked across the room to where Harper was sitting back on the metal folding chair. She had gone to a nearby utility sink, scrubbed her hands and arms with harsh industrial soap, and returned to her seat. She looked small, pale, and entirely unimpressed by her surroundings. "She did," Vincenzo said. Rossi glanced at Harper, then back to his patient. "Well, get him in the van. I need to get him to the clinic for surgery." As Dominic and Paulie carefully lifted Nicky onto a stretcher, Vincenzo walked slowly toward Harper. The dynamic in the room had shifted violently. She was no longer a target. She was a liability, but she was also a savior. In the brutal world of the Costa Syndicate, debts were taken very seriously. She had just bought Nicky's life. Vincenzo pulled up a wooden crate and sat down opposite her, their knees almost touching. He studied her face. It was a sharp, interesting face, devoid of makeup, framed by messy, damp hair. "So," Vincenzo began, his voice devoid of its previous menace, replaced by a dangerous curiosity. "Harper Hayes, trauma nurse, cat owner." "Barnaby," Harper corrected, staring at the concrete floor. "My cat's name is Barnaby. He gets anxious if he isn't fed by 8 p.m. It is currently—" She glanced at the heavy Rolex on Vincenzo's wrist. 11:45 p.m. My apartment is probably destroyed." "My men will go to your apartment," Vincenzo said smoothly. "They will feed Barnaby." Harper finally looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Absolutely not. I don't want your hitmen anywhere near my cat. Just let me go. I saved your guy. We're even. I don't know anything about your business. I didn't see where we drove, and I swear on my nursing license I won't go to the cops. I don't have the energy for paperwork." Vincenzo leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "It's not that simple, Harper. You've seen my face. You've seen Dominic, Paulie, and Nicky. You know we're operating out of the West Side." "I see a lot of faces," she retorted stubbornly. "Most of them I forget the second my shift ends." "The problem," Vincenzo continued softly, "is Thomas Gallagher. The man Harlow Kensington stole from. The man we are currently at war with. His men were watching Harlow's apartment. They saw my men grab you. They think you are Harlow, which means right now Gallagher's hit squad is hunting you down, thinking you have the routing numbers to $4 million. Harper stared at him, the reality of the situation finally piercing her shield of exhaustion. A cold dread pooled in her stomach. You painted a target on my back." "A mistake was made," Vincenzo admitted, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He wasn't a man who apologized, but looking at the woman who had just saved his soldier, guilt, a deeply unfamiliar emotion, pricked at his conscience. "If I let you walk out that door right now, Gallagher's men will pick you up before you reach the end of the street. They won't ask questions. They will torture you until you give them numbers you don't have, and then they will kill you." Harper swallowed hard. The metallic tang of blood in the air suddenly made her nauseous. "So what? You're just going to keep me here? I have a job. I have a life." "I'm going to keep you alive," Vincenzo stated firmly. "You saved Nicky. You have my protection. We are going to move you to a safe house until I can locate the real Harlow and deal with Gallagher." "No!" Harper stood up, her panic finally breaking through. "No, this is insane. I am calling the police. I am—" Before she could finish her sentence, the deafening screech of tires echoed outside the warehouse, followed instantly by the staccato, terrifying sound of automatic gunfire. The high-frosted windows of the warehouse shattered inward, showering the floor with lethal shards of glass. Bullets tore through the corrugated metal siding, pinging off the heavy crates and tearing through the air. "Get down!" Vincenzo roared. He lunged forward, tackling Harper to the ground, just as a spray of bullets riddled the metal folding chair she had been sitting on a second prior. He covered her body with his own, pressing her flush against the cold, filthy concrete floor. The weight of him was crushing, his chest heavy against her back, his hand shielding the back of her head. "Gallagher!" Paulie yelled over the deafening noise, returning fire toward the heavy steel doors with a submachine gun. "They tracked the van!" Vincenzo shouted back, pulling his own weapon, a heavy, matte black Glock. He looked down at Harper, who was trembling beneath him, her eyes wide with sudden, raw terror. The tough, cynical nurse was gone, replaced by a civilian caught in a war zone. "Harper, look at me," Vincenzo commanded, his voice slicing through the chaos. She blinked up at him, breathless. "I need you to run to the back left corner. There is a steel reinforced door. It leads to the underground tunnels. Go now." "What about you?" she choked out, terrified by the sheer volume of gunfire ripping the building apart. "I'm right behind you," he lied. "Move!" He rolled off her, popping up to lay down a suppressing fire toward the main entrance. Harper didn't hesitate. Survival instinct took over. She scrambled to her feet and sprinted across the warehouse, ducking as wooden crates splintered around her. She hit the heavy steel door, throwing her weight against the crash bar. It swung open, revealing a dark, descending stairwell. She paused, looking back over her shoulder. Vincenzo was pinned behind a forklift, reloading his weapon, vastly outnumbered, as black-clad figures began swarming through the breached entrance. He caught her eye and roared, "Go!" Harper plunged into the darkness of the stairwell, the door slamming shut behind her. sealing her inside the underground labyrinth of the Chicago Mafia, completely tethered to the man who had ruined her life and was currently fighting to save it. The air in the subterranean stairwell was thick, smelling of decades-old mildew, rat droppings, and the metallic tang of old iron. Harper stumbled down the concrete steps in the pitch black, her hands blindly grazing the rough, damp brick walls to keep her balance. The heavy steel door above her muffled the frantic staccato of gunfire, but the low-frequency thud of the explosions vibrated through the soles of her sensible nursing clogs. She hit the bottom landing, her breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. It was a tunnel, part of the old, forgotten Chicago freight network that twisted like concrete veins beneath the city. "Vincenzo," she whispered into the darkness, the name feeling strange on her tongue. No answer. Only the distant, hollow dripping of water echoing down the corridor. Panic, icy and absolute, seized her throat. She was a trauma nurse, trained to handle chaos in brightly lit rooms surrounded by monitors and crash carts. She was not a soldier. She didn't belong in the dark, hunted by men with submachine guns. For a fleeting second, she considered running back up the stairs. If she just explained to Thomas Gallagher that it was a dry-cleaning mistake. The heavy steel door above her slammed open with a deafening crash, bouncing against the concrete wall. Heavy, irregular footsteps pounded down the stairs. Harper pressed herself flush against the cold brick, holding her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. If it was Gallagher's men, she was dead. A figure tumbled onto the landing, swearing violently in rapid Italian. "Harper!" A rough, breathless voice called out. "I'm here!" she gasped, stepping out from the shadows. Vincenzo Costa leaned heavily against the tunnel wall. In the faint, ambient glow, bleeding from a street grate far down the corridor, she could see his tailored charcoal suit was ruined, dusted in white concrete powder. But it was the dark, wet stain rapidly spreading across his left bicep that caught her professional eye. "You're shot," she said, her voice instantly dropping an octave, slipping back into her clinical, authoritative tone. The fear evaporated, replaced by a rigid sense of duty. "It's a graze. Ricochet off a forklift," Vincenzo grunted, pushing himself off the wall. He holstered his matte black Glock 19 with his good arm. "We can't stop here. Gallagher's point men will breach that door in less than 3 minutes. Move." He grabbed her wrist, his grip slick with sweat and blood, and pulled her down the tunnel. They ran in silence, navigating the uneven, trash-strewn floor by the faint slivers of moonlight filtering through the storm drains above. The rumble of an L train passed overhead, shaking dust from the ceiling and briefly masking the sound of their ragged breathing. After what felt like a mile, Vincenzo suddenly stopped, swaying slightly on his feet. He leaned against a rusted electrical box, his face pale beneath his dark stubble. "Sit down before you fall down," Harper ordered. "I don't take orders from civilians," he bit back. Though he slid down the wall to a seated position, his chest heaving, Harper dropped to her knees beside him. "You take orders from the woman keeping you from bleeding out in a sewer." She didn't ask for permission. She grabbed the collar of his ruined, custom-made Charvet dress shirt and ripped it down the seam, exposing the wound on his upper arm. It wasn't a graze. It was a through-and-through laceration, jagged and bleeding freely. "I need light," she demanded. Vincenzo reached into his pocket with his right hand and tossed her a heavy brass Zippo lighter. Harper flicked it open. The small golden flame illuminated the tight, muscular contours of his chest, and the grimace of pain etched onto his handsome face. "You don't have a med kit on you, do you?" she muttered, leaning close to examine the exit wound. "Left my tactical trauma bag in my other suit," he replied dryly, his ice-blue eyes watching her intently. Even wounded and hunted, the man exuded a magnetic, dangerous authority. Funny. Harper stripped off her scrubs top, leaving her shivering in her thin white cotton tank top. She used her teeth to rip the durable hospital fabric into long, crude strips. This is going to hurt. A lot. I have to pack it tightly to compress the severed capillaries. Do it. She didn't hesitate. Harper pressed the wadded fabric directly into the torn muscle of his arm. Vincenzo didn't scream, but a sharp hiss escaped through his clenched teeth. His uninjured hand instinctively shot out, his fingers wrapping around her bare hip, gripping her tight enough to bruise. Harper froze for a fraction of a second, the heat of his palm searing through her thin tank top. But she kept her hand steady, tying the makeshift bandage off with a brutal, efficient knot. There, she breathed, clicking the Zippo shut, plunging them back into the dim gloom. It's a superficial pressure dressing, but it will hold until we get somewhere clean. You need stitches and broad-spectrum antibiotics. Vincenzo didn't let go of her hip. In the darkness, the space between them felt highly charged, crackling with an unspoken tension. He was a ruthless cartel boss. She was an underpaid healthcare worker. Yet, in the span of 2 hours, she had saved his man, and he had taken a bullet for her. "Why didn't you run?" Vincenzo asked, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that echoed in the tight space. "When I was holding them off, you could have lost me in these tunnels." "Because," Harper sighed, gently prying his fingers off her waist and helping him to his feet. "Despite all my better judgment, I don't leave my patients behind. Now, where the hell are we going?" "Safe house," Vincenzo rasped, his eyes lingering on her face. "Lincoln Park." The Costa Syndicate's safe house wasn't a gritty bunker. It was a sprawling, ultra-modern penthouse off Astor Street in Lincoln Park, overlooking the storm-tossed waters of Lake Michigan. Harper sat on the edge of a pristine, white Italian leather sofa, shivering violently. A blanket was wrapped around her shoulders, and a mug of hot black coffee was trembling in her hands. The adrenaline had finally crashed, leaving her hollowed out and completely numb. Across the expansive living room, an underground surgeon, a different one this time, a meticulous woman named Dr. Chen, was finishing the last of 12 neat sutures on Vincenzo's bicep. Vincenzo sat shirtless at a marble kitchen island, his face an impassive mask as the needle pierced his skin. His second-in-command, a sharp-featured man named Rowan, was pacing the hardwood floor, a burner phone glued to his ear. Yeah, sweep the perimeter again," Rowan barked into the phone, hanging up and turning to Vincenzo. "Gallagher's crew lost you in the tunnels, but they torched the West Side warehouse. It's a total loss." Vincenzo nodded once, dismissing the surgeon with a slight tilt of his head. He pulled a fresh black Henley shirt over his head, wincing slightly as the fabric stretched over his newly stitched arm. "What about the girl?" Vincenzo asked, his gaze drifting over to Harper. "The real one. Harlow Kensington." Rowan sighed, rubbing his temples. "Boss, this is where it gets complicated. I sent 2 of our best guys to her penthouse at West Elm Street. Place was empty. But it wasn't a panic evacuation. Her closets were cleared of all the high-end luggage, her passport is gone, and her safe was wide open." Harper looked up from her coffee, her brow furrowing. "Harlow travels a lot. She's an influencer or a model or something. She goes to Milan all the time." "She didn't go to Milan," Rowan said grimly, pulling an iPad from his briefcase and sliding it across the marble counter toward Vincenzo. "Our tech guys cracked her cloud account. 3 days ago, Harlow booked a private charter out of O'Hare to the Cayman Islands. And yesterday, she transferred exactly $4 million into an offshore holding company." Vincenzo stared at the screen, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "She didn't just steal the money. She framed the diversion to make it look like Gallagher intercepted it. Exactly, Rowan nodded. She pitted the Costa syndicate against the Gallagher family to start a street war. While we were busy shooting at each other, she vanished with the cash. Harper stood up, the blanket falling from her shoulders. Wait. If she planned to leave 3 days ago, why was she in the building lobby this morning? Why did she leave her coat with the concierge? The room fell dead silent. Vincenzo looked at Harper, his icy blue eyes widening slightly as the grim reality of the situation clicked into place. She didn't leave it by accident, Vincenzo said, his voice dangerously soft. He walked around the counter, approaching Harper slowly. Harlow knew you lived in her building. She knew you worked ungodly hours at the hospital and would be sleep-deprived. And she knew Gallagher's spotters were watching the lobby. Harper's breath hitched. You're saying she deliberately left her signature coat there for me to take? She needed a decoy, Vincenzo confirmed, stopping a few feet from her. She needed Gallagher's men to think she was still in Chicago, moving around the city, to buy herself enough time to get her plane off the tarmac. She set you up, Harper. She fed you to the wolves. The coffee mug slipped from Harper's numb fingers, shattering against the expensive hardwood floor. Dark liquid splattered across her sensible nursing clogs. Harlow Kensington, the perpetually smiling girl who borrowed sugar and complained about the building's water pressure, had casually handed Harper a death sentence just to buy a 12-hour head start. Anger, hot, bright, and blinding, flared in Harper's chest, burning away the last remnants of her fear and exhaustion. I want my cat, Harper said, her voice shaking with rage. Rowan blinked. Excuse me? My cat. Barnaby, Harper repeated, looking dead at Vincenzo. He's locked in my apartment, and right now, Thomas Gallagher thinks I am Harlow Kensington, which means his men are going to kick down my door, tear my apartment apart, and my cat is going to be caught in the crossfire. Harper, Vincenzo started, holding a hand out to calm her. It's too dangerous. We can't go near your building right now. I saved your man's life, she snarled, stepping into his personal space, jabbing a finger into his solid chest. She didn't care that he was the head of a criminal empire. She only cared that her ordinary, mundane life had been hijacked by a selfish heiress and a gang war she had no part in. I patched your arm in a sewer. You owe me. You have an army of men in expensive suits. Send them. Get my cat. Vincenzo looked down at the fierce, exhausted, scrub-clad nurse who was currently bullying the most feared man in Chicago. A slow, genuine smirk broke across his face, entirely transforming his harsh features. It was a look of pure, unadulterated respect. He looked over Harper's shoulder at his stunned second-in-command. Rowan, Vincenzo commanded, his eyes never leaving Harper's furious face. Assemble an extraction team, tactical gear, suppressed weapons. We're going to West Elm Street. Rowan stared at his boss like he had grown a second head. To extract a tabby cat, boss? Yes, Vincenzo replied smoothly, and grab some premium cat food on the way. The lady has had a long day. The absurdity of the situation was not lost on Rowan. He was a veteran enforcer, a man who had orchestrated million-dollar heists, high-profile extortions, and hostile takeovers of rival territories. Now, at 1:30 in the morning, he was standing in the back of a matte black tactical van, holding an armored Kevlar carrier bag, listening to an exhausted trauma nurse give him operational parameters on a feline. He's orange, about 12 pounds, and he hates loud noises. Harper's voice crackled over the encrypted earpiece Rowan wore. She was back at the Astor Street penthouse, pacing the length of the living room, while Vincenzo watched her with an unreadable expression. If he's scared, he won't be under the bed. He wedges himself behind the washing machine in the utility closet. Do not try to pull him out by his front paws. He will scratch your eyes out. You have to scoop him from the back. Copy that. Scoop from the back, Rowan muttered, exchanging a deeply pained look with the 3 heavily armed men in the van. All right, boys. We are Oscar Mike. Stealth breach. The target is hostile, 12 pounds, orange. Let's move. The van idled in the alley behind Harper's brick apartment building on West Elm Street. The rain was still coming down in sheets, washing the neon glow of the street lamps into a blurry cinematic haze. Back at the penthouse, Harper chewed on her thumbnail. Vincenzo stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of amber bourbon in his good hand, his left arm resting in a black sling. Your heart rate is elevated, Vincenzo observed quietly, taking a sip of his drink. You were calmer when Gallagher's men were shooting at us in the warehouse. Barnaby doesn't have a bulletproof vest or a small army of hitmen, Harper snapped back, stopping her pacing to glare at him. He is entirely dependent on me. If anything happens to him because of your stupid turf war, nothing will happen to him, Vincenzo said, his voice dropping to that smooth, commanding baritone that left no room for argument. Rowan is the best. He's never failed an extraction. Boss! Rowan's voice hissed over the radio sitting on the marble kitchen island. We have a complication. Harper's stomach plummeted. She rushed to the counter, Vincenzo stepping right behind her, his proximity a solid, grounding heat. What is it? Did they hurt him? She demanded toward the speaker. Not the cat, Rowan replied, his voice a low whisper. We're in the stairwell of the 3rd floor. Gallagher's men beat us here. They bypassed the front door lock. I'm looking at a 4-man hit squad outside apartment 3B. They're about to breach. That's my apartment, Harper breathed, the color draining from her face. Vincenzo's jaw tightened. Thomas Gallagher was moving fast, desperate to secure the $4 million he believed the woman inside that apartment possessed. Do they know the apartment is empty, Rowan? Negative. They think the Kensington girl is in there. They've got a battering ram. They're going in hard. They're going to terrify Barnaby, Harper yelled, her protective instincts overriding any sense of self-preservation. Vincenzo, do something! Vincenzo didn't hesitate. He leaned over the radio, his eyes locked on Harper's terrified face. Rowan, engage. Do not let them through that door. Copy, Rowan replied. The radio clicked off. For 30 agonizing seconds, the penthouse was dead silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the glass. Then, the radio flared to life, transmitting the chaotic, muffled sounds of a close-quarters firefight. The distinct pop-pop-pop of suppressed gunfire echoed through the speaker, followed by shouts, the heavy thud of bodies hitting drywall, and the unmistakable sound of a door frame splintering. Harper squeezed her eyes shut, her hands gripping the edge of the marble counter, so hard her knuckles turned white. Vincenzo covered one of her hands with his own. His palm was calloused, warm, and surprisingly gentle. Breathe, Harper, he murmured. Status, Rowan, Vincenzo demanded into the mic. Heavy breathing filtered through the speaker. Corridor is clear. 4 tangos down. But boss, they kicked the door off the hinges before we neutralized them. We're inside the apartment. It's a mess. And there's no sign of the target. Check the utility closet, Harper yelled, leaning into the mic. Behind the washing machine, I told you. Moving to the utility closet, Rowan grunted. There was a long pause, filled with the sounds of heavy boots crunching over broken glass and overturned furniture. Then, a sharp hiss. Son of a... Rowan, Vincenzo barked. The target is acquired, Rowan said, his voice strained. And the lady was right. Do not attempt a frontal extraction. I repeat, the target is heavily armed with claws. We have him in the Kevlar bag. Moving to extract now. Harper let out a sob of relief, her forehead dropping onto her hands. She was exhausted, terrified, and emotionally completely hollowed out, but her cat was safe. "Hold your position, Rowan," Vincenzo suddenly commanded, his sharp eyes catching an alert on the security tablet resting on the counter. "My spotters on the street just called it in. 3 black SUVs just rolled onto West Elm. You're blocked in, and Thomas Gallagher just stepped out of the lead vehicle." Harper's head snapped up. "What? What does that mean?" "It means," Vincenzo said, his voice dangerously calm, "that Gallagher isn't leaving this to his foot soldiers anymore. He thinks he has Harlow trapped, and he came to collect his money personally." He picked up his burner phone and dialed a number from memory. "What are you doing?" Harper asked, her pulse hammering in her ears. "I'm ending the war," Vincenzo replied as the line connected. He put the phone on speaker and set it on the marble counter. It rang twice before a gruff, gravelly voice answered. "Costa, I figured you'd be hiding in a hole after my boys lit up your warehouse tonight." "Thomas," Vincenzo greeted smoothly, leaning against the counter. "I see you're standing outside a lovely brick building on West Elm. I strongly advise you to tell your men to stand down and let my people walk out of there." "Your people?" Gallagher laughed, a harsh, scraping sound. "I don't care about your people, Vincenzo. I want the girl. I want Harlow Kensington, and I want my $4 million. That's the problem, Thomas. The girl isn't in that apartment, and neither is your money." "Nice try. My men watched her walk into this building." "Your men watched a decoy," Vincenzo corrected, his tone turning razor-sharp. "While you and I were shooting at each other over a misunderstanding, Harlow Kensington boarded a private jet at O'Hare. She's currently airspace over the Atlantic, heading for the Cayman Islands. She played us, Thomas. Both of us." Silence stretched over the phone line. The tension in the penthouse was thick enough to choke on. "You expect me to believe you, Costa?" Gallagher finally spat. "Check your encrypted inbox," Vincenzo said, gesturing to Harper, who watched him with wide eyes. "My tech team just forwarded you the flight manifests, the offshore routing numbers, and the security footage of Harlow leaving the country 3 days ago. She set up my people to kidnap a civilian, a nurse who happened to live in her building, knowing you would follow the hit. She wanted us to kill each other." Another long pause. Harper could faintly hear the sound of someone typing on a tablet through the phone speaker. "Son of a bitch," Gallagher whispered. The anger in his voice shifted from Vincenzo to the heiress who had made fools of the 2 most powerful men in the city. "My men are walking out of that building," Vincenzo stated. "It wasn't a request. They are carrying a black bag. If your men so much as look at them wrong, I won't bother tracking down Harlow. I will level your entire operation by sunrise. Are we clear?" "Take your men, Costa," Gallagher growled. "But this isn't over. Not until I have Kensington's head on a spike." The line went dead. Vincenzo picked up the radio. "Rowan, you are clear to exit. Bring the cat home." 30 minutes later, the private elevator of the Astor Street penthouse chimed. The polished steel doors slid open, revealing Rowan. His tactical vest was dusted with drywall powder, and he had 3 deep, bloody parallel scratches down his left cheek. In his arms, he carried an armored Kevlar duffel bag. Harper didn't wait for him to step into the room. She sprinted across the hardwood floor, dropping to her knees as Rowan gently set the bag down and unzipped the top. A loud, demanding meow echoed in the massive modern living room. A large orange tabby cat poked his head out of the bag, his ears flattened in annoyance, his green eyes scanning the unfamiliar luxury around him. "Barnaby!" Harper choked out, tears finally spilling over her lashes. She scooped the heavy cat into her arms, burying her face in his orange fur. Barnaby immediately began to purr, a sound like a small, rattling diesel engine, rubbing his head aggressively against her chin. Rowan stood up, clearing his throat. He reached into his tactical vest and pulled out 3 cans of premium, wild-caught salmon pâté, setting them neatly on the marble counter. "Target secured, boss, and the perimeter is clear." Gallagher's men pulled back entirely. "Get that cleaned up, Rowan," Vincenzo said, gesturing to the scratches on his enforcer's face. "Hazard of the job," Rowan muttered, giving the purring cat a respectful, weary glance before stepping back into the elevator. Vincenzo walked over to where Harper was sitting on the floor. He knelt down beside her, moving slowly so as not to spook the animal. Barnaby paused his purring, turning his large green eyes toward the imposing Mafia boss. Vincenzo held out a single, scarred finger. Barnaby sniffed it thoroughly, deemed it acceptable, and gave it a rough lick before returning to Harper's embrace. "See?" Vincenzo murmured, a soft smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "He likes me." Harper wiped a tear from her cheek, looking up at him. The adrenaline was entirely gone, leaving behind a strange, quiet intimacy. "My apartment is destroyed, isn't it? The door is gone, and the living room took some damage," Vincenzo admitted honestly. "But it doesn't matter. You can't go back there. Gallagher might know the truth, but until this is fully resolved, you are vulnerable." Harper let out a long, shuddering sigh. "Vincenzo, I have a shift at St. Jude's tomorrow at 7 p.m. I have a life. I can't hide in a penthouse forever." "You won't have to," Vincenzo said, his ice-blue eyes locking onto hers with intense sincerity. "My men will repair your apartment. Better security, reinforced doors. In the meantime, I'm putting a permanent detail on you. 2 of my best men will drive you to the hospital, wait until your shift ends, and bring you safely to wherever you are staying." "I can't afford personal bodyguards," she laughed weakly. "It's not a service I bill for," he replied, reaching out with his uninjured arm to brush a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch sent a jolt of electricity down her spine. "You saved Nikki tonight. You saved me in those tunnels. The Costa Syndicate protects its own. And Harper, you are one of ours now." Harper looked at him, really looked at him. Vincenzo Costa was dangerous. He was a criminal. He lived in a world of blood and shadows that went against everything she stood for as a healer. Yet, as she sat on the floor of his safe house, her cat purring in her lap, she felt safer than she had in her entire life. She had been kidnapped, shot at, and dragged through a sewer, all because of a mistaken coat. But looking into Vincenzo's eyes, she realized the universe had a twisted sense of humor. Harlow Kensington had meant to hand Harper a death sentence. Instead, she had accidentally handed her the key to the underworld and the heart of the man who ruled it. "Okay," Harper finally whispered. "Okay," Vincenzo repeated, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. "Okay, but if your gorillas are going to drive me to work," Harper said, a faint, genuine smile touching her lips, "they aren't allowed to play that terrible heavy metal music at 6 a.m. I need my sleep." Vincenzo chuckled, a deep, rich sound that filled the room. "Whatever you want, Harper. Whatever you need." As the storm raged outside, pounding against the glass of the penthouse, inside, a new alliance was forged. A ruthless Mafia boss and a chronically tired trauma nurse. It was a chaotic, terrifying diagnosis. But as Harper leaned into his touch, she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never, ever be boring again. The story of Harper and Vincenzo proves that sometimes the universe's biggest mistakes are actually perfectly disguised destiny. A simple mix-up over a dry-cleaned trench coat plunged an ordinary trauma nurse into the violent, high-stakes world of the Chicago Mafia. But instead of breaking her, the ordeal revealed her strength, ultimately saving lives and taming the heart of a ruthless crime boss. Harper didn't just survive the underworld. She diagnosed its problems, commanded its soldiers, and accidentally claimed its king. If you loved this thrilling tale of mistaken identity, unexpected romance, and a very brave tabby cat named Barnaby, please hit the like button to support the channel. Share this video with your friends who love a good mafia romance drama with a strong female lead, and subscribe so you never miss out on our next heart-pounding story. See you in the next video.